Cecilia Marks became a mother 3 times in a single afternoon without planning any of it. Not the way most motherhood arrived without planning, which was with some warning and 9 months of adjustment and the gradual physical reality of a life-changing shape. This arrived on a Tuesday in October, when a social worker named Donna pulled into Cecilia's driveway in a county vehicle and stepped out with 3 girls who stood in a row on the gravel beside the car, with the specific stillness of children who had learned that stillness was safer than movement in unfamiliar situations. Their names were Priya, age 6, Simone, age 4, and May, age 2, who was holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear, with the grip of someone who had decided that the rabbit was non-negotiable, regardless of what else was happening. Cecilia was 34 years old. She was single. She worked as a pediatric nurse at the regional hospital, 40 minutes away, 4 days a week, on a schedule that she had arranged with the precision of a person managing several things simultaneously, and could not afford to have disrupted. She owned her house, a 3-bedroom on the edge of a small town called Millhaven, which she had bought 8 years earlier with the focused determination of a woman who had grown up without permanence and had decided that whatever else her adult life contained, it would contain a place that was unconditionally hers. She had been a licensed foster carer for 14 months. She had taken 1 placement before this, a boy named Curtis who was 7 and had stayed for 3 weeks before being placed with a relative, and who had left behind a drawing of their backyard that Cecilia had taped to the refrigerator and had not taken down. She had not been contacted about a placement in 9 months. She had assumed, without particular distress, that the system had simply moved on without her, and that her fostering experience would remain a single, quiet chapter. Then Donna had called on a Monday afternoon and said she had 3 sisters who needed emergency placement, together or not at all, and that Cecilia was on the list, and that the list was short. Cecilia had said yes before she had finished processing what she was agreeing to. She had spent the rest of Monday rearranging the spare room, which had only 1 bed, and building a temporary sleeping arrangement from the single bed and 2 couch cushions and a camping mat she found in the hall closet, and that she made into something that looked intentional rather than improvised, or tried to, with the sheets she reserved for good occasions. She had cooked a large pot of pasta, because pasta was the food she knew how to make, that worked for the most people, regardless of age and preference. She had taped a piece of paper to the kitchen wall and written "Welcome" in 3 different colors, because she owned 3 markers, and that had seemed like the right use for all of them. She had not slept. Now she stood on her own porch and looked at 3 girls on her gravel and tried to look like a person who had done this before, which she had, once, for 3 weeks, which was not the same thing. May looked at her from under the brim of a too large hat and held the rabbit tighter. Cecilia crouched down to May's level and said hello and asked the rabbit's name. May said nothing for a long moment. Then she said "Buttons" in a voice so small it was almost not a voice at all. Cecilia said Buttons was an excellent name. May considered this. Then she took 1 small step forward. That was the beginning. The town of Millhaven had 4,000 people, and the specific social metabolism of small towns, which was that news moved faster than the people who carried it, and that everyone had an opinion about things that did not concern them, and expressed those opinions with the confidence of people who believed that proximity was the same as expertise. The opinions about Cecilia's 3 new additions covered a range from genuine warmth to genuine concern, and landed most frequently in the territory of genuine doubt. She was single. She was 34. She worked 4 days a week. The house on the edge of town was not large. The children were very young. The math, as people described it at the pharmacy and the diner and the school gates, with the authority of people who had done the math, did not add up. Cecilia was aware of the math. She did not discuss it with the people at the pharmacy and the diner and the school gates, because she was not a person who discussed things with people who had decided the conclusion before the evidence was in. She discussed it with Donna during the monthly check-ins, honestly and without performance. And she discussed it with herself in the specific privacy of the 3-hour window between when the children went to sleep and when she did, sitting at the kitchen table with whatever was left of the day and the drawing Curtis had made still taped to the refrigerator. The first year was the hardest thing she had ever done. Not because of the children, who were difficult in the specific ways that children who had experienced disruption were difficult, with the particular behaviors and retreats and tests that were not misbehavior, but communication, the language of children who had not yet established whether the ground beneath them was solid. These things she understood from her nursing, from the training, from the fundamental orientation toward children that had sent her into pediatric nursing in the first place. The hardest part was the material reality, the money, which did not stretch in the ways she needed it to stretch without the specific creativity of a person who had grown up without enough and had therefore developed an expertise in that territory that was not a virtue she had chosen, but a skill she had been given by circumstances. The time, which required an architecture of planning that left almost no margin and that broke down approximately once a week in ways that required improvisation and the goodwill of her neighbor Dorothy, who was 68 and retired, and had decided in the second month that she was involved, whether anyone had asked her or not. Dorothy became the margin. Dorothy was the thing that made the math add up when the math did not add up on its own. She arrived in the mornings when Cecilia had a 6 o'clock shift and needed the children fed before school. She arrived in the evenings when the hospital ran late and the school called and someone needed to be somewhere in a car. She arrived on Saturdays with food she had made more of than she needed, and the specific fiction that it was simply extra, which Cecilia accepted with the gratitude she had learned to receive, without diminishing it by making it complicated. She did not adopt the girls in the first year. The first year was fostering, assessed and reviewed with the regular thoroughness of a system that was imperfect and trying. In the second year, Cecilia began the adoption process. It took 14 months. It required paperwork and home visits and assessments, and a legal process that moved at the pace legal processes moved, which was slowly, and with frequent requests for documentation she had already provided. The adoption was finalized on a Friday afternoon in April, when Priya was 8, Simone was 6, and May was 4. Cecilia sat in the family courtroom with the 3 girls beside her and a judge who had clearly done this many times and who smiled at May's rabbit, who was also present, and who said words that Cecilia had been waiting to hear and that arrived with a weight she had not been fully prepared for, despite having prepared for nothing else for 14 months. She did not cry until they were in the car. May patted her arm and said it was okay, and Cecilia said she knew. She was crying because she was happy, and May considered this information for a moment, and then appeared to find it satisfactory, and went back to her rabbit. Priya, from the back seat, said, "So we are marks now." Cecilia said yes, they were marks now. Simone said she liked it. Priya said she did too. May said Buttons was a marks too. Cecilia said absolutely Buttons was a marks. She drove home through the April afternoon and pulled into the gravel driveway and looked at the 3-bedroom house on the edge of Millhaven and thought about a Tuesday in October, 6 years ago, when a county vehicle had pulled in here and 3 girls had stood on the gravel with the stillness of children who had learned that stillness was safer than movement. She thought about the math that did not add up, and about Dorothy, and about Curtis's drawing on the refrigerator, and about Donna on a Monday afternoon saying the list is short. She thought about yes said before the processing was finished. She went inside and made pasta. The years that followed had the texture of a life being built rather than managed, which was a different texture entirely, and one that Cecilia recognized from the inside, even when she could not have described it to anyone outside. Priya was the reader. She moved through books the way some children move through food, constantly and with total commitment. And Cecilia supplied this appetite through the library and the secondhand bookshop in the next town, and the specific strategy of leaving books in visible places around the house, because Priya would pick up anything she encountered and give it 20 pages before deciding. By the time she was 12, she had a quality of informed opinion about the things she read that Cecilia found both impressive and occasionally challenging to keep up with. Simone was the builder, not metaphorically, literally. She built things from whatever was available, beginning with blocks and graduating through cardboard structures of increasing ambition to a phase around age 9 where she disassembled and reassembled every small appliance in the house that Cecilia could be persuaded to allow her access to. Dorothy contributed several broken items from her own house to this project, with the pragmatic generosity of someone who had decided Simone's interests were worth supporting regardless of the structural implications for small kitchen appliances. May was the talker. She had arrived at age 2 barely talking, the quietest of the 3, the one who had communicated primarily through the rabbit and a set of expressions that Cecilia had learned to read like a second language. By age 5, she had made up for the early quiet with a sustained output that suggested she had been storing material and had finally decided the conditions were right for release. She talked about everything. She talked about ideas and people and things she had noticed and things she had wondered about. And she asked questions with the focused persistence of someone who required actual answers rather than the deflections that worked on less attentive children. The town of Millhaven watched all of this because the town of Millhaven watched everything. And the math that people had done in the early years required ongoing recalculation as the evidence came in. The recalculation was not always comfortable for the people doing it, because recalculation required acknowledging that the original calculation had been wrong, which was a thing that people in small towns and everywhere else found difficult with varying degrees of grace. What the town saw over 16 years was the following. They saw Priya Marks win the regional essay competition at age 13 with a piece about water access that the judge had described as having the quality of writing produced by someone significantly older. They saw Simone Marks build a working model of a sustainable drainage system for a science fair at age 12 that had been sent to the state competition and had placed second to a project with substantially more expensive materials and substantially less original thinking. They saw Mae Mark stand up at a town meeting at age 14 when the topic was the proposed closure of the Community Youth Center and deliver an 8-minute address that had not been prepared in advance and that had changed 3 votes and preserved the funding. They saw Cecilia Marks at every school event and every performance and every competition, in the 3rd row because the 3rd row had the best angle, and she had discovered this early and claimed it consistently. They saw her in the hospital parking lot at 6 in the morning, and they saw her at Dorothy's kitchen table on Sunday mornings, and they saw her at the pharmacy and the diner and the school gates, not discussing the math anymore because the math had resolved itself into something that did not require discussion. Dorothy died when Priya was 15. She went quietly in her sleep on a Thursday night in November, which was the way she had said she wanted to go, and which she had apparently arranged with the same practical efficiency she had applied to everything else. She left her house to her nephew in another state, and she left Cecilia a letter and a tin that had been on her kitchen shelf for as long as Cecilia had known her, which Cecilia had always assumed contained tea bags or biscuits, and which contained, as it turned out, neither. The letter was 2 pages in Dorothy's handwriting, which was large and confident and consumed paper at a rate that reflected a person who had never been concerned about running out. Dorothy said she had watched Cecilia for 16 years and that she wanted her to know several things that she had not said in person, because saying them in person would have required a kind of emotional display that neither of them would have found comfortable. She said that in 68 years of living, she had not seen many things that qualified for the word remarkable without qualification, but that what Cecilia had done on that gravel driveway with those 3 girls was one of them. She said the tin was not her idea. She said it had been on her shelf for 11 years and had come from a conversation she'd had with her own mother before her mother passed, in which her mother had told her to keep it safe until the right person needed it, and that Dorothy would know who the right person was when that person appeared. Dorothy said she had known within the first 6 months. Cecilia opened the tin. Inside was a folded piece of paper, and beneath the paper, nestled in a small cloth, a key. The paper was a property deed, old enough that the paper had the particular texture of age rather than storage, for a piece of land on the northern edge of Millhaven County, 3 acres adjacent to the river, that had been in Dorothy's family for decades, and that Dorothy had never mentioned because she had been waiting for the right person and the right moment, and had apparently concluded that the right moment was the moment she was no longer there to see it. The key, Dorothy's letter said, opened the storage unit at the facility on Route 9 where Dorothy had been keeping, for the past 11 years, the architectural drawings that Simone had made at age 9 and 10 and 11, when her building phase had extended from appliances to larger things, and that Dorothy had collected from the recycling bin when Simone threw them away, because Simone always threw her own work away. Dorothy had had the drawings assessed by a friend who had been an architect before retiring to Millhaven, and whose opinion she trusted. The architect had said that one of the drawings, the one Simone had made at age 10, of a community building for a hypothetical river site, was not the work of a child playing at architecture. She had said it with the specific care of a person distinguishing between two genuinely different categories of thing. The riverside in the drawing matched the 3 acres in the deed with a precision that Dorothy said she had noticed, and that she suspected Simone had noticed too, in the unconscious way that children absorb the geography of their world. On the drives they had taken together along the river road, which had been one of Simone's requests from early childhood, for reasons she had never explained. Cecilia sat at the kitchen table with the deed and the key and Dorothy's letter for a long time. Then she called the girls in from wherever they were in the house. Priya was in her room reading. Simone was in the backyard, looking at something on the ground, with the focused attention of someone who had found something interesting. May was on the phone, which was her natural state. They came to the kitchen and sat at the table, the 3 of them, 16 and 14 and 12. Marks all of them, including by this point the rabbit, whose continued presence in the household had required 2 repairs over the years that Simone had performed with the same seriousness she applied to the appliances. Cecilia told them about Dorothy's letter. She read the parts that were for them rather than for her alone. She showed them the deed and the key. Simone looked at the deed for a long time without speaking. She looked at the river coordinates and the boundary description, and her expression went through something that Cecilia watched carefully because she had spent 16 years learning to read the specific language of Simone's face. May said Dorothy kept all of it. She said it not as a question. Cecilia said Dorothy kept all of it. May was quiet for a moment, which was not her natural state, and therefore meant something. Then she said that Dorothy had always seemed like a person who understood that things took as long as they took, and that the right time was the right time, and not any earlier. Priya said that was an accurate description of Dorothy. Simone was still looking at the deed. She said the riverside in her drawing. She said she had been to that piece of land. She had gone with Dorothy on one of their drives when she was 9 or 10, and Dorothy had pulled over, and they had walked to the river and stood there for a while, and Dorothy had said nothing specific, just stood there, which was Dorothy's way of letting you draw your own conclusions. Cecilia said she thought Dorothy had known something about Simone that Simone might not have fully known about herself yet. Simone looked up from the deed. She said she wanted to study architecture. She said it plainly and directly in the way she said things she had been holding for a while and had finally decided to release, which Cecilia recognized as the same quality of directness that had come from May at age 2 in the form of a step forward on a gravel driveway. Cecilia said she knew. Simone said she had not told anyone. Cecilia said she knew that too. The kitchen was quiet for a moment, in the way that kitchens were quiet when something that needed to be said had finally been said, and the room was absorbing it. Then May said that they should probably go and see the land. Priya said that was the obvious next step. Simone looked at the deed one more time. She touched the edge of it with one finger in the precise, careful way she touched things she was taking seriously. She said yes, they should go and see the land. They went on a Saturday, all 4 of them in Cecilia's car, the same 10-year-old Honda that had driven them home from the family courtroom on a Friday afternoon in April when Priya was 8 and Simone was 6 and May was 4, and the word Marks had just become theirs. The riverland was exactly as the deed described. 3 acres of flat ground adjacent to the water, open and clear, with a quality of light in the afternoon that arrived from the west across the water and settled on the land with the particular warmth of a place that had been waiting for something and was not in any hurry about the waiting. Simone stood in the center of it for a long time. She did not say anything. She looked at the river and the light and the tree line and the way the ground lay, and her eyes moved the way her eyes moved when she was building something in her mind, assembling the elements into a structure that existed in her specific way of seeing before it existed anywhere else. Cecilia stood beside her and said nothing, because nothing was the right thing to say. May was at the river's edge throwing small stones into the water, with the focused satisfaction of someone conducting research. Priya was sitting on the ground reading a book she had brought from the car, because Priya brought a book everywhere and had long ago stopped apologizing for it. Cecilia looked at the three of them on this piece of land that Dorothy had held for 11 years for the right person and the right moment, and thought about a Tuesday in October and a county vehicle on a gravel driveway, and 3 girls in a row with the stillness of children who had learned that stillness was safer than movement. She thought about Donna saying the list is short. She thought about yes. She thought about the math that people at the pharmacy and the diner and the school gates had done, and the recalculations that 16 years of evidence had required them to perform, and the specific quality of being a person who did not do the math first, but understood in some way that preceded calculation that the answer was going to be worth whatever the working out required. Simone said, without turning from the river, that she was going to need graph paper. Cecilia said she would get her graph paper. Simone said a lot of it. Cecilia said as much as she needed. The river moved past them in the way rivers moved, continuous and indifferent, and somehow, in its indifference, exactly right for the moment, which was a moment that had been built over 16 years by a woman who had said yes before the processing was finished, and 3 girls who had stepped forward in their own time and their own ways, and had not stopped stepping forward since. May threw one more stone. Priya turned a page. Simone looked at the land. Cecilia stood in the afternoon light on 3 acres of river property in Millhaven County and felt, with the complete and uncomplicated certainty of someone who had arrived somewhere after a long journey, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She had been 34 years old on a Tuesday in October when the math did not add up. She was 50 years old on a Saturday in April when it did.